Hello, Wild Ones. Welcome to episode number 204 of the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. I am your host, Elizabeth D'Alto, and this is Sunday sermon number 12, Sacred Activism, What We Stand For, and What You Can Expect From Us. Today's episode is less of a sermon and more of a declaration. And before we dive in, I want to let you know that there is some interesting truck noise going on outside of my window. This is the only time I can record this week, and so if you can hear it, I apologize, and we're just going to keep going anyway. If you're new to the podcast, or this is your first Sunday sermon, typically these are shorter solo episodes, just 10 to 20 minutes, where I do things like oracle readings, share my favorite prayers or poems, and excerpts from what I'm reading. These are like wild and untamed gospel, heart ponderings, and delicious morsels of wisdom to spark your own truth, power, and love from my wild soul to yours. In these episodes, I explore creative and inspiring ideas, thoughts, and ruminations for you to be nourished and fed by going into your week. As a person who was raised with religion, another inspiration to create these sermons was to provide a Sunday ritual that's more aligned with my current and ever-evolving spirituality and worldviews. That said, all belief systems are welcomed here on the show. My truth, ponderings, and curiosities are simply that, my own. So no matter what your faith is, may you get exactly what you need from listening to this. May you have the eyes to see and ears to hear what is the truth and what is your truth. And may you remember always that everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you. You are made from love, you are love, and you are loved. May you also have the courage to use your voice when it rises up within you to speak your truth with love, kindness, strength, grace, and compassion. Now on to today's topic. In light of some recent events in the online coaching, spirituality, and self-help worlds, as well as some deep and important conversations I've been observing and participating in both online and offline for months, I'm dedicating today's sermon to being crystal clear about the values I hold and therefore that are also held by my team and my company across the board. This is not about proving anything. It's about setting clear and proper expectations. Because even though we may not know each other personally, if you listen to this show, we are in a relationship, and I value you as an individual human being. So I'm going to let you know how specifically I do sacred activism, and also what I do on an ongoing basis to continue improving how I show up in this realm. So if or when I mess up, and I might, you can hold me accountable in a way that is kind and loving, and therefore useful and productive, that brings us closer as a community and can create healing, transformation, and change, rather than drama, turmoil, further injustice, or separation and disconnection. And I want you to know you're always welcome to come directly to me and the team by emailing us at hello@wildsoulmovement.com. We will listen, you will not be dismissed, and if appropriate, I will respond personally. If not, please treat my team as extensions of me. So I started researching the term sacred activism as I've seen it used more and more lately and wanted to know who coined it and what specifically it means. As does happen in the online space frequently, people use terms without necessarily knowing the full weight, the full gravity, or the full definition, and I didn't want to do that. The person who coined sacred activism is named Andrew Harvey. He's the author of several books, including a book called Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism, which I'm currently reading. His definition is, sacred activism is about finding gratitude, forgiveness, and compassion. It's about opening yourself up to the kindness within you, letting go of pain, and making a conscious choice to help heal the world. I was delighted to see this as the formal definition because this is exactly how I desire to, quote, do activism in my life and in my business, which, to be honest, are not separate. My earliest memory of feeling activated in this way and sensing the truth in my bones of how all humans deserve to be treated, long before I had any fancy words to describe it, is in the 5th grade. I won a spelling bee or something, and the prize was a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. My teacher asked my mom permission first if I could read it, and she said yes. I remember not just crying, but sobbing during certain sections of the book and imagining what it would be like to have lived during those times and if I would have been as courageous as Atticus Finch, the main character. Now, it's easy to say, oh, of course I would have, but truly we have no way of knowing. I reread that book 4 more times and watched the movie at least half a dozen as well throughout middle school. And when I was in middle school, I did take it upon myself to speak up for students who were being mistreated by teachers in class. And yes, those students were usually Black. I remember one time it was so intense, the teacher called my mom into school and asked her why I thought it was my job to be the lawyer for the class, to which my mom responded, "Why don't you tell me why my daughter feels like she needs to be the lawyer for other students in your classroom?" D'Alto women don't really take shit from people. Even so, feeling emotionally stirred does not translate into being woke as it's being described these days. I've still been guilty of not knowing what I didn't know. I've unintentionally gaslit people, said and written offensive things, and been really blind and inconsiderate to and of people whose life experiences are different than mine. My impact has not always matched my intent. I have faced my own confusion about being part Latina, but predominantly white passing, and not really knowing where I fit in, or even feeling worthy of embracing the Puerto Rican culture that makes up half of my family. And I don't share any of that for pity, to make myself a victim, or to convince you of anything. What I do want you to know is that I'm paying attention, and I will not be lazy about this. I'm committed to unpacking all of this, and I'm not a person who considers activism or social justice a trend or something nice to have. It's non-negotiable. And yet, I'm also still a woman with fierce boundaries, and I'll protect my own energy and be highly discerning about which spaces and conversations I enter into, as not all are safe. I'll also unquestionably remain committed to my sacred work and mission in the world of helping women love, trust, accept, and respect themselves fully through my work, as well as to reclaiming and redefining womanhood for the 21st century by helping women connect to their wild souls and untame themselves. We're living in an age where anyone with a Facebook account can start conversations they neither have the knowledge, skills, or capacity to hold space for, nor the ability to, necessarily, and this is happening more and more. Violent communication is happening all over social media every day, and I want you to know that I have zero tolerance for that in my spaces. And my spaces are not limited to private Facebook groups for people in my programs. This counts on my social media profiles. This counts on my own email inbox. While I'm here for respecting and honoring all perspectives, I'm not for humans being hideous to each other, attacking each other, or making each other wrong, especially without full context, or setting ground rules and intentions for the communication. And my policy on this is a firm not on my watch. And listen, hindsight is a beautiful teacher. Have I always been this responsible, skilled, resilient, or able to hold appropriate space for these conversations? No. As mentioned before, I have royally messed things up, and as I wrote in a post a few months back, I'm willing to mess it up on the way to getting it right. I'm also willing to own and acknowledge if or when I do get it wrong and make amends where appropriate. But I'm improving every day, and if you participate in my spaces or listen to this show with any regularity, you will see the evidence. For almost 3 years, I lived in a bubble in North County, San Diego, surrounded by mostly white spiritual people, and on more than one occasion had the experience of feeling othered because of the way I look, the way I communicate directly, and not necessarily in fluffy, spiritual, air quote, spiritual terms. I'm not into psychedelic drugs or plant medicine, which was very popular in that community, and I personally like to keep my sexual expression private, sacred, and between myself and my lover or my partner. It sucks that I had to have this experience myself of being othered to be able to see and hear when others share their experience, and that's how it went. And now I can't unknow or unfeel how awful it felt and truly how traumatizing it was as well. Or that by comparison to what many people of color, people in the LGBTQ community, disabled people, and people in other lesser considered populations, my experience was mild. That said, on a platform like a podcast or a blog, it's the responsibility of the host to protect the platform and that space as well. I personally treat this as a sacred responsibility and am diligent about vetting our guests, continuously educating myself about world and social issues, and making real-life efforts by elevating and centering voices of those who have been lesser heard and respected in our culture, as well as actively seeking out experiences offline with those who are different than I am, to better know where people are coming from. I may not ever fully understand because I haven't walked in their exact shoes, but I can diligently stay open, listen, believe what people say are their experiences, and keep showing up, even when it becomes uncomfortable or confronting, which it does pretty regularly. And in spite of all the effort I make, sometimes I will not be able to access information about a guest that may come to light after our interview. This has been the case in 4 instances over the last year, and my policy is to delete these interviews when it happens. I won't promote people on this platform whose behavior goes directly against everything we stand for. And in some cases, as happens in online debates, where it's nearly impossible to get the facts to discern what's true and what isn't, I will always err on the side of protecting this platform and not steer you towards those who will treat you any less than you deserve to be treated, with respect and with love. And I'm not talking about light-washed, spiritual bypassy kind of love, but real love. The kind that sees and honors you as an individual, sharing the same Mother Earth and doing your best to live in these very interesting, sometimes volatile, and yet still miraculous times. I will also do this without fanfare, publicly shaming, or naming people because energetically, I'm not interested in the enmeshment, the drama, or the chaos that can create. So to wrap up, as I mentioned in the beginning, if you catch anything in my content or any of my spaces that feels off or offensive to you, from this point forward, I welcome your feedback at hello@wildsoulmovement.com. My promise to you is that you'll be heard. You will not be dismissed, and we'll do our best to implement what is brought to light. I will always trust my intuition and err on the side of not exposing my students or listeners to immoral, unethical, oppressive, violent, unjust, misogynistic, or any other practices and behaviors that do not align with our values and mission. My ask of you is that you understand implementation takes a bit of time depending on where it needs to occur. For example, it's taken me over a year and a half to diversify our podcast lineup because it's important to me to build relationships with people and not to tokenize them. Could I have just invited a whole slew of people of color or those in the LGBTQ community or other lesser considered populations? Sure, but that would have been inauthentic, and that's not how I roll. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. This is Sunday Sermon number 12, and it's episode number 204. You can find our show notes with links to any resources I mentioned at untameyourself.com/episode-204. I appreciate you all so much for listening, for taking the time, for sharing these episodes with your friends and families and coworkers when it feels appropriate, and for continuing to come back to listen. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.